I have no idea how I came to be in possession of 7.5 meters of fine cotton muslin. I think it might have been a student production, but it is exquisite stuff. It is the real deal. Having uncovered this stash, I needed a project for it, and I felt like it had to be a gaule, which is sort of French for French, or chemise à la reine, which is kind of a little bit French for Queen's petticoat. The chemise à la reine or gaule was an 18th century lightweight dress for informal wear in warm weather. Very fashionable right at the end of the 18th century. However, I don't honestly have any chance to wear an 18th century dress. What I really needed was a much simpler shift, so an actual underdress that I can wear under a linen medieval thing I get to wear occasionally. So, as a compromise, what I decided to do was make a gaule, but with no underdress at all, because this is going to be the underdress most of the time when I wear it. Now, in order to do that, I followed a mashup of possibilities. Partly I got what I did from Amber Butcher. It's a Stitch in Time episode where she looks at Marie Antoinette's chemise à la reine. For most of my technical guidance, however, I used two videos by Bernadette Banner, one where she makes a summer dress that is an adaptation of a chemise à la reine, and another one where she copies an extant 19th century shift. Just to be clear, I'm not doing this to investigate historic sewing techniques. I just want the dress, so I'll be using this. I've pre-washed and ironed my entire fabric in the manner of a responsible dressmaker, and I've decided that a length down the back, which doesn't require too much of an additional curve, is going to be 140 centimetres from shoulder to ankle length. That's leaving, I'm quite short, that's leaving a substantial amount for a hem, which is perhaps not terribly historically accurate, where fabric would normally be conserved by not having excessive hem or seam allowance. But I like lots of hem because I think it gives an extra weight and drape to the base of the fabric, and also it allows me some margin for error, and goodness knows I need plenty of that. I have a fabric width here of 115 centimetres, and this is going to be gathered on a drawstring in the manner of the chemise à la reine. So what I've decided to do is use one width as a straight piece to make the back, and then two to make the front, where I obviously need a little bit more space. And I'm hoping that by doing so, I'll be able to keep that really simple piecing of rectangles together that is so appealing about some of these early shifts. The challenge I've set myself is, can I keep the simplicity of using only rectangles that we see in the historic shift, but get the sumptuous gathers of the chemise à la reine? To that end, I've got two long rectangles, simple lengths of the fabric to be the front, one just very slightly shorter piece to be the back, two smaller rectangles matching to be the sleeves, and two teeny weeny underarm gusset squares. And I am counting, and a mountain of various kinds of cotton tape, and I'm going to see if I can make it out of nothing more than that. You can see where I've marked at 140 centimetres on the selvage there. I'm just going to make a small cut there, and I'm not going to measure the distance over the full width of the fabric. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a thread and pull it all the way along and gradually remove it. And what that will do is that will give me an exact straight line at 140 centimetres all the way across, straight across the grain for me to work with. You can see where I pull that thread, what a nice straight line it then gives you to cut across. So at this point, I've taken my two fronts and a back and sewn them along the long edges into one massive tube. And what I've done is I have sewn up from the bottom, from where the hem will be, which is the opposite of what I would normally do. And the reason for that is because the fronts are just a little bit longer than the back, and I'm intending to have them match all the way up to the underbust gathering, and then after that they will diverge. So that's my way to keep that process as simple as I possibly can. This is where I'm experimenting with Bernadette's system of laying down a wider piece of cotton tape, and then while I'm stitching that in on either side of it, top and bottom, putting the drawstring in the middle and sewing it up with the drawstring already inside. I have made my life a little bit easier than she did by just using a slightly wider tape here, so I'm really not in too much danger of running over the drawstring and messing the whole thing up. So it's still long, it's still meters and meters and meters of straight lines, so here we go. You see, I don't have a mannequin, so I'm just going to do this by getting inside it and pulling the string from here, because it's the easiest way to see what I'm doing all the way around. I'm not completely mad. As I keep pulling out the drawstring and running the gathers down and down and down, this shapeless, voluminous sheet of fabric gradually condenses into something more resembling a garment. I've pinned the top at the shoulder where I want it to meet. I've settled the first row of gathers where I want it to sit under the underbust. So now I can feel where my waist is, where I want the second line of gathering to go. And all I need to do is measure down from that first line of gathering to where that second one's going to go. I'm going to put the waist about there, which gives me a spacing between the two of about 15 centimetres. One thing you're going to want to make sure you remember if you try this is that there are no fastenings or openings on this dress. It really is just a tube with the gather all the way around. So the only way you're going to get it on and off and sitting snugly at the points you want it to be brought in is with the drawstring. So remember to leave plenty of extra room for this part to expand and contract. And I'm going to be putting in stitches that do take in the drawstring here and here, which are the two seam lines that line up the back third of the gathers. And the other thing I'm doing while I'm at it is I'm just putting a few little stitches in here to close the drawstring into a full circle, because that way, no matter what happens with the gathers and the drawstring, I will never lose the end. Now I've got the bulk of the body of the dress done, let's talk about sleeves. In the famous portrait of Marie Antoinette, where she wears a garment like this, she has extremely full puffy sleeves that are gathered at 3 points in using a similar method to the body of the dress. However, in the Amber Butcher A Stitch in Time episode where she recreates that dress, the extant garment that they have to work with, which gives you a really good look at the construction, has very narrow sleeves but all the way to the wrist. In Bernadette Banner's adaptation of this form into a summer dress, she gives it short little floaty sleeves. But also in Bernadette's 19th century historic method shift that she makes, she uses square cut sleeves that go to 3/4 length here. I'm going to do a mashup where I'm going to use those square cut sleeves that Bernadette does on her shift, but I've extended them to go all the way to the wrist. Now this means it needs to be a little bit too full for me to get my arm in and out, so I will then come up with my own wrist treatment, probably a little pleat and a button there, to secure it at the wrist. That's in case I decide to wear it as a shift under a long dress with long sleeves. I may decide that I want the option of having a little bit of shift poking out at the end. I'm sitting here looking at what will be the inside of the sleeve, the wrong side, And then I'm opening that up a little bit at that end, and I'm matching the square to the right side on that side there. I will pin this properly in a moment, but I'm just doing it fast to show you how it works. And then again, the other half of that square, the other edge of that square will get sewn in a similar way to the other side of the sleeve. So it will then become a little fitted piece there that will give you more room to move. Here is the sleeve. The fold is over here. The seam is running along this side. I'm going to fold back a corner of the seam into a triangle like that and take the little gusset square. If I lay it over there, you can see the way one side of the square will fit along the triangle that's been formed by folding back that sleeve edge, and the other side of the square fits along the edge of the underneath side of the seam, thus. And when I've sewed along here and sewed along there, it will fold down like that, and it will look like a regular right angle corner, but it will actually have this little extra piece of fabric here to create more space. In order to set the sleeves, all I'm going to do is measure the length that I have at the top of the sleeve, seems to be 29 centimeters, and then make sure that I have that amount of fabric free on the front and back side of the bodice. One thing it would be really easy not to know about setting sleeves is that you have to do it with the sleeve the right way round, not inside out. That way you can still keep right side to right side as you make it all line up. You can see that I'm doing something quite weird here, which is setting the sleeve first when I haven't yet closed up the shoulder seam. That is not the normal way of doing things. The reason is this. My sleeve in this instance has no gathers in it. It's just straight all the way around, whereas my back and front around the shoulder are going to, when this is finished, be really, 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 really gathered. So it is much easier to fiddle things around and tweak them and also cover up errors in a place that's gathered than a place is smooth, hence me reversing the usual order of doing things here as I set the sleeve. Here's the wrist point of my sleeve with nothing done to it. What I'm doing is I'm taking a little shank button and I'm sewing it right on the seam point, just a little way in from the edge. And then, you can see this is the finished one I've already tried experimenting with here. Then I'm folding a pleat on one side and stitching it in place just under the button there. So it's like a folded piece of fabric. Now there's still plenty of space there for my hand to go through. And what I've done is put this little piece that I've cut out of some lace, I've cut out the middle large enough to go over the button, and I've sewn it in place in exactly a symmetrical point from the pleat on this side. So once my hand goes through, I can fold that up, put the button through, and what I will have is an effect, turning it the right way around there, an effect of a pleat giving a fullness at the bottom of the sleeve, but tapering to a neat closed point at the wrist with just that tiny bit of decoration. Now, I don't want you to think there's anything historical about this. I just made it up, and it gives me a look that I like, and it will be suitable for putting underneath my long sleeve dress if I want to wear it that way. In both Bernadette's summer dress adaptation and, as far as I can see, the extant garment shown in Amber Butcher's episode of A Stitch in Time, the top of the gathers at the front are attached to a flat and ungathered insert over the shoulder, which acts as a shoulder strap. I'm going to avoid that, partly because I want to keep this simplicity of just working with rectangles, and partly because I really like the look of these gathers when they are sewed down flat. So I'm going to try and take the gathers all the way up here and join them to the back part at the top, using a bit of fairly thick, durable cotton tape to stop things moving around and hopefully take the strain at the top there. Then I'm simply going to split down the front here and put a little drawstring in the front and hope to find a way to create a meeting point between the front drawstring and the secured non-moving shoulder portion. How I'm handling the back here is mostly based on just the fact that I really like the look of laid down gathers that sit finished and flat, and that's the effect I'm looking for. So for that reason, what I've decided to do is I've run a gather line along there, just hand sewed a really simple running stitch and pulled the gathers in along that. I've cut this piece of flat tape to the width I need the back to be, 38 centimeters for me. And now I'm going to stretch out those gathers to match that tape line. And then I'm going to pin them in place, fold the gathers over the tape, and then hand sew along the bottom edge of the tape. And hopefully that way I'll get that beautiful effect of gathers folding over and lying flat. That's why I'm using tape rather than a cord or a conventional drawstring, because I want to preserve that flat look. I only have one thing left to do for this to be finished, and that's the neckline. And yes, I have been putting it off because it's terrifying, because it's the one part in this entire dress where I need to make a cut to shape, and that removes my margin for error, which I've been leaving plenty of up until now. I've decided the way I'm going to solve it is just to divide the front panels in half, just straight down the middle. And so each of those front sections was 115 centimeters wide before I took the seam allowance off. I'm just going to halve that, and half will go gathered up to the left and sewn onto the shoulder strap, and half will be cut down on the right and folded around a drawstring to create the drawstring front. And as long as it's symmetrical, who's to know that that wasn't how I planned it in the first place? I think I've solved the way I'm going to do the shoulder seam, and it's like this. The dress is right way around, that's the sleeve out that side, so the shoulder seam is here. There's the tape. I've sewn the back onto the tape against it, like that. Now I'm going to sew that on top of the front portion that's going to be the shoulder seam. So I'm simply going to hand sew, probably using a back stitch because it's nice and strong, the tape flat against the front. Now then the next thing I'm going to do after I've done that is I'm actually going to fold it like that. And that way both the raw edge of the back and the raw edge of the front will be tucked away, creating a pretty line where the two meet, both on that side and on the inside, because that will be tucked in like that. So I'm going to try doing that, and I will show you how it turns out. Now I'm in the middle of the long and tedious process of sewing the top drawstring into the top of the blouse. So double folding one fold, then over the drawstring, and be super careful not to catch the drawstring with the thread, because of course it has to run freely once I finish doing this. Well, I've done one half of the front and it took so long. There's the gathered bit at the shoulder, and here is the hand stitched drawstring portion. Let's see if I manage to make the drawstring work without catching it anywhere. Oh, seems to be working, seems to be working. Don't forget to put your stitches in this end when you start, or you'll end up just pulling your drawstring out, and that would be more frustrating than I can adequately describe. So that looks as if it's going to do what it needs to do. So I just have to do that all over again on the other side, exactly the same way. After rewatching A Stitch in Time, I changed my mind about the hem because Amber Butcher said that it was one of the features of the dress historically that it had a very fine hem. So I just reduced it to being a tiny hand-rolled hem instead of the larger one I planned, which turned out to be a really good thing because the gathers in the middle tend to bunch up the fabric a lot. So that extra length all disappeared into that. So if you're making it, make sure you give yourself plenty of length. I'm in the home stretch. I've almost finished the hemming. One of the things that's been a real pleasure about using this fabric is how well it takes the shape you put on it. The ability to just draw threads and therefore have a straight line to work along has been a big advantage, but also you can see here with the fine hemming, I've been as I go just folding it once and then folding it again and running my finger along it, and you can see it keeps that crease and holds its shape, which has made certain points of joining and finishing easier than more slippery fabrics, things like silks or knits. And there it is, it's all done. 5 meters of fabric, 3.5 meters of hem, 2 gather lines around the middle and 1 around the neck, and a little bit of improv with the sleeves. And that is my chemise à la reine. I didn't use a pattern and I didn't make any lining for it at all. I would say yes to the decision about sleeves. That worked really nicely. Yes to the treatment of the back, which worked out okay. Probably a no to getting rid of the shoulder strap pieces and making the whole thing in gathers, because I ended up with a lot of extra bunched fabric. But overall, yes to not using pattern and just using rectangles. And be aware that even if you do, like me, decide to default to a sewing machine, there is so much hand finishing in this. I ended up doing masses of handwork anyway. But what I have ended up with is something that is really genuinely beautifully soft and light and creamy. The idea behind making this dress was that it could have 2 possible uses. First, as a chemise, so a shift, therefore underwear, but also potentially as a dress. Now, if I wear it as a dress, that's an 18th century look, so there's not a lot of potential for that. But I do have 2 or 3 events a year where I get to show up in medieval dress, and that's when it would be really useful to have a chemise available. So we'll give that a try first. When it's a chemise, it goes on first. Then the stays go next, and then this lovely linen kirtle goes on top. And that's how it will function as a component of medieval garb. However, if I'm wearing it as it was originally intended as an overdress, then obviously the undergarments go on first. I don't have a maid to pull all my drawstrings tight. Then next comes the gaule itself. And what I've learned from looking at a lot of portraits, because it may have been a scandal for Marie Antoinette to appear in a portrait in one of these, but Louise Auguste of Denmark seems to have been painted in them all the time. They always seem to end with a contrasting sash. And this is the finished garment worn as a dress, the completed chemise à la reine or gaule. I feel like I should be posing with this parrot. It just seems like the thing.